Another factor that leads some people to falsely conclude that men get away with abuse is the tendency of activists to cherry pick the outcomes of specific cases, usually high profile cases. And when you consider that we have 50 different states with multiple counties in each of those states, each with their own court system, and then on top of that, you also have other common law countries, of course, one can find a case that fits their narrative. But that doesn't mean that those specific cases are in any way indicative of general trends in our legal system. Now, even in situations where men do receive inappropriately light sentences or get away with certain crimes, I find that people don't understand the complicating factors that lead to those outcomes. Criminal sentencing is something most people just don't understand, and the media does a terrible job of reporting on it. And I tried to give some examples in the book, some of which didn't even have to do with sexual abuse. I offered the example, kind of a famous case where Dan White, an individual, a politician in San Francisco, shot Mayor George Moscone and killed Harvey Milk, a fellow politician. And at his trial, the psychological professionals that were hired tried to argue some complicated psychological theories in his defense. Part of that had to do with his consumption of junk food. And of course, the media kind of simplified their reporting on this. It became known as the Twinkie defense. Kind of ridiculous, but again, a little bit more complicated than the media portrayed. Well, Dan White ended up being convicted only of the lesser charge. More recently, there was a case where a young man in Texas who was driving under the influence killed some people, and his defense team hired psychologists who argued that he suffered from a condition known as affluenza. And this was apparently where his parents had spoiled him to the point where he didn't know the difference between right and wrong. Now, I think this theory is a little bit goofy. I can't believe the court bought it, but it's an indication of how gifted legal and psychological professionals can really work miracles at times. It's not an indication that our legal system favors one group or another. Another case I cited was a case from California where a young woman stabbed her boyfriend over 100 times and killed him. She got off on the theory that she was suffering from cannabis-induced psychosis. Now, I think most people would argue that was an unfair outcome for such a heinous crime, but nobody would seriously argue that this was a result of sexism in favor of women or anything like that. But the same's true with men who seem to get away with these crimes. There's no reason to believe that our legal system is sexist in favor of men. And of course, as I've pointed out in other chapters, that on average, men receive longer prison sentences than women do for committing similar crimes. The broader point here is this: you shouldn't cherry pick cases, and you shouldn't use these specific instances to judge our entire legal system.